we've had a few comments from the party leaders which have been, hopeful, have been expressing a view that they're on the path. But quite how far down that path they are, we don't know. And we certainly don't have a final deadline. There's been no indication of exactly when they expect the talks and an agreement to be actually reached.
So what were the final election results, and how did New Zealand find itself in this position where three parties have to come together to govern?
Well, because New Zealand has a proportional representation system, some sort of negotiation between parties to form a government is required. So at the last election, we saw the outgoing Labour government lose a lot of seats, and instead the National and ACT parties combined fell just a couple of seats short of a majority. And because they were a couple of seats short of a majority, they've needed to bring in a third party, the New Zealand First Party, to form the majority in Parliament to be able to form a government. So it's those three parties, National, New Zealand First and ACT, that are currently negotiating, trying to work out what their new government will look like.
Why has it taken this long to get to this stage?
Well, the first thing that happens in New Zealand is we have a 3-week period where special votes are counted and our electoral rolls are gone through to make sure that there's been no unlawful voting take place. So the final election result was only declared 3 weeks after the actual election day. And in particular, the New Zealand First Party said they wouldn't even start negotiating until that final election result. So the parties really have only been talking to each other for a couple of weeks. So even though it's, getting on for 5 weeks after the election now, in reality, it's only been a couple of weeks that they've been talking.
And how difficult has it been for Prime Minister-elect Christopher Luxon to broker a deal, given the history of the three parties not really wanting to work together?
So in particular, the ACT Party and New Zealand First Party have a very, very confrontational and they just don't like each other, put it that way. So it's going to be very hard for them at a personal level. Their party leaders have a very strong dislike for each other to be able to work together. Christopher Luxon, the Prime Minister in waiting, made a bit of a bed for himself because he suggested that his background in corporate management meant he'd be able to make a deal quite quickly, quite easily. He was used to doing this sort of thing. And he's finding that doing those sort of deals in politics is a lot harder than doing it in the corporate world. So he raised expectations, and that's come back to bite him a bit because he hasn't been able to do the deal as quickly as he seemed to promise he would.
Well, New Zealand First leader Winston Peters, one of the more experienced politicians, is confident the negotiations will not fail. Why is that, and what do you think he's pushing for?
Well, he's confident negotiations won't fail because if they fail, New Zealand would have really no choice but to have a new election. And that's not in the interest of these three parties. If we had to have another election, it would be devastating for them. The public would blame them. They'd lose out heavily. So all the incentives are on National, New Zealand First and ACT to do a deal. But of course, they've got very different policies. They're very different parties. So there's a lot of areas of disagreement that they're having to sand down in order to be able to work together. Tax is a big issue. National has promised taxation relief, that there'd be tax cuts. But the other two parties are holding out for those to be paid for. They're saying, well, how are you actually going to fund it? And that appears to be one of the major areas of disagreement. National needs to deliver those tax cuts. New Zealand First and ACT are pushing hard to make them specify where the money will come from.
We can safely say, though, that New Zealand will move from a majority government to an arrangement between multiple parties. Internally, how different will the government look?
So our last government was a very, very unusual one. The Labour Party, because of its management of COVID back in 2020, was able to get a single-party majority, which is something that was just unheard of in New Zealand because of our proportional representation system. We've reverted back to the usual practice under our proportional representation system, which is parties need to do deals. They need to negotiate a government between themselves. What that government then looks like can take a range of forms. It could be a formal coalition. It could be just an agreement to support each other on policies and so on and so on. So not only do they have to work out what policies they will collectively pursue, they also need to work out what their actual arrangement between themselves will be. Formally, will they have ministers in government? Will they be ministers in cabinet? Will they actually be in coalition or just in a support arrangement with each other? All of that sort of stuff needs to get worked out before the government can, get going, can actually start operating.
And they have to be able to work together. In a latest poll, 37% of respondents said they were not confident the three parties could work constructively together. And the poll also recorded a rise in the number of people who were unsure whether the country was heading in the right direction. What impact is this uncertainty having on New Zealanders?
Well, at the moment, I think people are starting to get a bit antsy. They're saying, well, come on, we'd like to get this done. We do need to remember, though, that government is still carrying on. The old Labor government is still running the country in arrangement and in discussion with the new incoming national-led government. So things are still getting done, right? Or all of the actions of government are still taking place. But as we're getting further away from the election, and also we have Christmas coming up when New Zealand basically shuts down for a while, I think people expect that the new government should be in place and start work well before that Christmas break. So I'd say, if this drags into next week, people are going to start to seriously be saying, we need to get this done. We need someone new in charge to start running the country.
Well, we look forward to learning what the outcome is, whenever that is. Andrew Geddis, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.